Today, we're doing one of my most requested videos on the channel. This is my top 10 fantasy books of all time. This list was very difficult to narrow down to just 10, especially since I'm constantly gaining new favorites as I'm reading more, so I'm most likely gonna have to update again in a future video. Maybe we'll make this kind of an annual thing if you guys like this type of video. Now, several of these are going to be series that you've probably heard me talk about before in previous videos, but every single one of them I would say are must-reads for fantasy fans. And remember, this is my list. If your favorite series isn't on here, like say Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's probably because I haven't read it yet, or I'm just not far into it. Or, you know, maybe I did read your favorite series and I hated it. Then, I don't know, dislike the video and send me hate mail. But I would like to hear your top 10 fantasy books in the comments. Let's see if we got any in common. And if we do, then consider liking and subscribing because that helps out a lot. Real quick, this video is brought to you by Established Titles. Do you ever feel like you just don't get the respect you deserve? I just don't get the respect I deserve. You feel like you should have some sort of title. I should have a title. Established Titles is a project based on an old, historic Scottish custom where landowners were referred to as lairds, which, you know, in English they'd be lords and ladies. Their title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Ardilly, Aberdeenshire, Scotland. And you also get an official certificate with a crest and everything, so that you can call yourself a lord or lady, while also helping to protect the biodiversity of Scotland and worldwide reforestation efforts. They plant a tree with every order and work with global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. Your certificate has a unique plot number so you can see the exact location of your land. This land is mine now. Now, this is not a fake certificate. You can officially change your title to Lord or Lady. You can put it on your credit card. You can put it on plane tickets. You can put it on your dating profile. It makes for a perfect last-minute gift, especially with Mother's Day right around the corner. You could even buy a couples pack or a family pack. Established Titles is running a big sale right now, and if you use the code Captured in Words, you get an additional 10% off. You can go to establishedtitles.com/capturedinwords to get your gifts right now. I'm a lord now. I'm no longer a disappointment. Like I said, it was really hard to make this list. There's a lot of books I wanted to include on here that I didn't, so I want to start off with some honorable mentions. The Deltora Quest books by Emily Rada. These deserve a mention for being the very first fantasy series that got me into reading. Basically, the creation of this channel can be traced all the way back to when I first read Forests of Silence. Maybe there never even would have been Captured in Words if it wasn't for Deltora Quest. Now, these are middle grade fantasy, and that's pretty apparent, but even after rereading them recently, I still think they hold up nicely. The Lies of Loch Lamora, the first book in the Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch. This is honestly one of my favorite books, but since I've only read the first one, I'm not gonna put it on my top 10. But if you want to read a book with some amazing dialogue, some of the best you'll ever see in a series, as well as a really good friendship dynamic, and just amazing characters overall, as well as a lot of complex political conspiracies and mysteries, then make sure to read The Lies of Loch Lamora. The Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series by Tad Williams. Again, I'm not putting this one on the list because I've only read book 1 and I'm currently in the middle of reading book 2. But the beautiful lush lands of Austin Ard and the adventure that Simon goes on is one of my favorites. I'm definitely gonna have to make some videos on this series. The Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. These books are one of my favorites, but I already have a Brandon Sanderson series on this list, so I wanted to make room for others. But if you didn't see it, I made a video on why you should read Mistborn, so make sure to check that out. The Witcher books. As much as I love the video games, I've only read around 3 books into the Witcher saga, and I would like to read more before I put it on my top 10. But I love the whole Monster of the Week thing, and Geralt and Ciri are 2 of my favorite characters. The Band series by Nicholas Eames, starting off with Kings of the Wild. If you like rock and roll, if you like old school fantasy, if you like classic RPGs, then you should read Kings of the Wild. It takes place in a world where mercenaries are basically rock stars, and it's a get the band back together story. I love how Eames balances out the humor and the pop culture references with some more serious moments, and it just works so well. Also, Moog is amazing, that's all I gotta say. The Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin. Again, I haven't read far enough to put this on my top 10, but from what I've read, I've really enjoyed this series. This is a breath of fresh air in the fantasy genre. It's a harrowing story of love and science-y magic, apocalypses, and the fierce relationship between a mother and her child. At number 10, we have the only middle grade / YA series on this list, Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. I have got so many good memories reading this series. Admittedly, it has been a long time. I should probably reread them before the show comes out. I've heard people say that it holds up incredibly well, and I don't doubt them. The original series is quick and easy to read, it's filled with adventure and plot twists and action, and the humor is amazing as well. Not to mention, I learned a lot about Greek mythology. And the next series, The Heroes of Olympus, kind of ages up with the audience and becomes more YA rather than middle grade. The Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I feel bad this one is so far down on the list because Fitz Chivalry always gets the short end of the stick, and he doesn't deserve that. It's difficult to rank these books because I like them all for different reasons. Now this is part of the larger Realm of the Elderling series, which is 16 novels in total broken up into 5 parts. Farseer being the first trilogy, and it is a masterpiece of character-driven epic fantasy. Fitz, Night Eyes, and the Fool are incredible characters that I'm always going to love, and I can't wait to read more of Realm of the Elderlings. Robin Hobb writes some amazing characters that you can believe in, and through these relationships and interactions, we see these characters truly shine. And of course, being inside of Fitz's head, we get mostly his perspective on things, but he is such a good character, I love him. Some elements of Hobb's fantasy are kind of old school, you'll see some familiar tropes, but it's written in a modern style, and with some tremendous literary skill that honestly rivals some of the best in fantasy. Now, despite assassin being in the titles of the books, don't go in expecting some fast-paced assassin story like the Night Angel Trilogy by Brent Weeks. This is not that. In fact, the series is kind of a slow burn at times, especially book 1. It was one of the slowest starts to a series that I've ever read. But oh, is it worth it? It is completely worth it. The main character is Fitz Chivalry Farseer, the illegitimate son of Prince Chivalry Farseer. He's taken into Buckkeep Castle after being raised as a stable boy to secretly be trained as an assassin, to bind his loyalty to the crown, while he's also being trained to use the Skill, which is a mysterious magic that's been passed down through his bloodline. But mostly it's about his harsh life and how people hate him because of his birthright. It's an incredible trilogy if you don't mind a slower pace, and I feel like it deserves way more recognition on YouTube than it gets. I haven't really made a video on it yet, so I'm one to talk. The Earthsea Cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. Honestly, these are some of the finest fantasy books written in the 20th century, and I will die on that hill. We have seen the influence of Earthsea in many other fantasy works as well as all throughout pop culture. Ursula K. Le Guin has shaped much of the American science fiction and fantasy world, and this is a series that deserves to be read. When I said Percy Jackson was the only young adult series on this list, I completely forgot that the Earthsea Cycle is also young adult. But I think these books are for everyone. Le Guin has stated that while she was initially resistant to the idea of writing a book for children, she came to realize she did not have to dumb down the content matter and the themes in order for the story to appeal to teens. There is some timeless lessons here that I think can only be appreciated as an adult. It incorporates some really deep thoughts, and nothing is just black and white. Each island within the archipelago brings new ideas and philosophies into play, and they're books that embrace all peoples and places. Now, the Earthsea Cycle is notable for being one of the very first Western fantasy series comprised almost entirely of a brown and black cast of characters. Writing in the 1960s, Le Guin wanted to push back against the popular trope of pure heroes of light and dark and evil villains. So she envisioned her hero, Ged, as a brown-skinned boy from a realm of mostly dark-skinned people. At the time, publishers didn't like this, and they portrayed Ged on official cover art and promotional material as a white boy. Yeah, they whitewashed Sparrowhawk. Thankfully, we've come a long way. Now, her inspiration for the story was the idea of what life would be like for a young Merlin or Gandalf when they're just starting off their journey. Le Guin's books are very easy to read, the characters are rich, relatable, and human. If you haven't read them, then you need to. I have a link in the description for the full collection of the Earthsea Cycle. The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. Bancroft quickly became one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time. When I started reading Senlin Ascends, it felt like something that I would have thought of. Thankfully, Josiah Bancroft wrote it first because he absolutely nailed the execution. In fact, it took me less than a single paragraph to discover that this author has a lot of skill. And I love when books can do that, when they can instantly immerse you in the language and pull me into the world and the mentality of Thomas Senlin through its detail and intelligent prose. It feels like a modern day classic, and I don't doubt that it's gonna be a classic one day. Book 1 revolves around Thomas Senlin, a mild-mannered schoolmaster who, along with his new bride, travels to the renowned Tower of Babel, where they plan on spending a month-long honeymoon in the luxury ringdom called the Baths. Things take a twist when he's separated from his wife and he has to enter the tower alone to find her. The tower is nothing like it was advertised to be. He's manipulated, robbed, and betrayed as he makes his way up the different ringdoms of the tower. And each ringdom is unique from the last, and this surreal steampunk world is probably my favorite aspect of this series. I was always excited for the next wonder or the next creature or clockwork mechanism or whatever weird thing that the tower wanted to show me. In a lot of ways, this series kind of reminds me of BioShock. Specifically BioShock Infinite, if you ever played that game. We have this place that's said to be paradise, only it turns out to be an environment that brings out the dark and sinister side of the people that have spent a lot of time in it. Now, apart from the world building, Senlin goes through a really satisfying character growth, as this learned man soon realizes that his only chance of survival in the tower is by using his intelligence and becoming a man of action. If this series was not on your radar, I hope it is now, because it 100% deserves to be read. Again, I got affiliate links in the description, those help me out as well, so make sure to use them. The Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. Honestly, I think that Pratchett is a genius. He's one of the most skilled writers of speculative fiction that has ever lived. Speculative fiction. Speculative? Speculative. Speculative. He is the king of ridiculous, absurdist fantasy comedy that doesn't just feel like pointless parody. These are satisfying and witty moral comedies about human society and our frailties. It makes fun of fantasy tropes while also subverting expectations. Discworld is filled with memorable and complex characters, and they're overall just a lot of fun, but also meaningful. If you don't know, Discworld is a series made up of 41 novels. Don't worry, you don't gotta read them all. And I actually wouldn't recommend starting in chronological order, because the first book is just not really a good representation of the series. The main books are grouped together by mini-series, and really you can start with whichever one. I started with Mort, which is the first of the Death books, and I think it's a great place to start. Or you could go with Guards, which is one of my favorites. The series is set on a flat world that voyages through space on the back of 4 enormous elephants that are in turn standing on the shell of a giant turtle. I don't know what else to say, except for that you need to read Discworld. The FirstLaw Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first trilogy set in this world, after which there's some standalone novels, and then the Age of Madness trilogy. In 2021, Abercrombie became one of my favorite authors of all time. I had the chance to interview him along with Stephen Pacey, his incredible audiobook narrator, which was awesome. They're both so easy to talk to. By the way, I would highly recommend the audiobooks. Now, the FirstLaw series is one I was not expecting to enjoy as much as I did. It is grimdark fantasy, and I haven't really read a lot of that. But even for all the dark moments and the pessimism, this series surprised me with how unexpectedly light it can be at times. It's actually filled with a lot of humor, especially within the internal monologue of some of its characters. I'm looking at you, Glokta, and these characters are terribly unlikable people that I was not expecting to like so much. Take for example Inquisitor Sandan Glokta, a formerly renowned swordsman who, after being taken as a prisoner of war and tortured, is now left a bitter cripple who serves the Union as a professional torturer himself, cutting treason out of the Union one confession at a time. He's a very cruel guy with a lot of cynical thoughts and harbors hatred for the man who invented stairs. Yet he became one of my favorite characters in fantasy. There's also Giselle Dan Luther, an arrogant, vain, selfish nobleman and talented fencer who goes through a lot of character growth. And of course, Logan Ninefingers, the Bloody Nine, a barbarian with a fearsome reputation he no longer wants anything to do with, but that he can't seem to escape from. Another of my favorite characters of all time. If I haven't made it obvious, this series is very character driven. In fact, the first book doesn't really have much of a plot at all. It basically just acts as a way to introduce us to these characters. There is still more books I need to read taking place in the FirstLaw world, but the original trilogy definitely deserves a spot on this list. The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. Obviously you guys saw this one coming, though you may be surprised it's only in 4th place. Again, I find it really hard to rank my top 10 when I like them all for different reasons. The Kingkiller Chronicle is a series that means a lot to me. I first read it exactly at a time when I needed to, and even now, every time I reread it, I still discover more and more. You may have noticed it's one of my favorite series to make videos on and to come up with theories for, because Rothfuss sprinkles so many details and foreshadowing within his lyrical prose, making it so you're still discovering these after several rereads. Honestly, you kind of need to reread these books at least once to understand them better. Now yes, it is an unfinished trilogy and we really don't know when book 3 will come out. I have been tempted to write a fan version of book 3, but I mean I should probably focus on my own writing, and I'm sure that Rothfuss will eventually finish it. Even though it is unfinished, I'm still happy that I read them because I've gained so much from these 2 books, and I think they can still be enjoyed on their own. If you love coming up with theories or looking into fan theories, well, this series has a lot of them, and personally, I find that to be really fun. I'm not gonna say much more about Kingkiller because I've made a lot of videos on it already, so let's move on to the next one. The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I'll admit, I'm only 6 books into the series. I have not finished The Wheel of Time. I took a long break from reading it, and I'm finally getting back into reading it again. I haven't finished Kingkiller yet either. Nobody has. Same with the Stormlight Archive, but those are both some of my favorites. I think by the time you're 6 books into it, you should be able to determine whether it's one of your favorite series or not. That ranking might change in the future, but I'll just have to update in another video if that happens. From what I've read so far, I love The Wheel of Time. Is it perfect? No, it isn't. I've heard many people complain that Jordan's writing style is very long-winded, and yes it is, but I don't really think it's in a bad way. I find that I'm able to picture everything thanks to how much attention to detail there is in the descriptions. With The Wheel of Time, I feel so immersed in this world, and I care so much about these characters. I feel like the incredibly rich imagery really helps with the immersion. Also, I feel like Robert Jordan understands the beauty of a word or a sentence that's just where it needs to be. He kind of reminds me of Patrick Rothfuss in that way, where Rothfuss is a little bit more lyrical with his writing, Jordan feels more poetic. Now, ever since, Lord of the Rings, fantasy has changed, and there were many that took inspiration from Middle-earth, but Jordan, I feel like, is the one author that kind of took what Tolkien set down and nearly perfected it, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that The Wheel of Time is like a copy of The Lord of the Rings. It is definitely its own thing, but I think since Tolkien, it's the one series that can kind of compare. There really isn't another author or series that I can think of that has the same timelessness to it that Tolkien's work has other than The Wheel of Time. The world is incredibly rich with diverse cultures and complex characters. The magic system is fully realized. Jordan is a master of foreshadowing, and overall, I've just really been enjoying this series a lot. And now that I'm getting back into reading them, I can't wait to see how Sanderson finished off the series. The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, I am putting this in my number 9 spot, above the Kingkiller Chronicle, which is probably a surprise to some of you. The Stormlight Archive is just a lot of fun. This is one of the only series I can think of that consistently has moments that make you want to stand up and cheer, or that gives you goosebumps because of how epic a scene is. Kaladin, Dalinar, Shallan, Adolin, and all the other characters are some of my favorites in literature. Surge binding is probably my favorite magic system ever. There's just so much diversity for how it can be used. It can feel sort of video game-like, which I don't really think is a bad thing at all. Honestly, I think the Stormlight Archive would be incredible as a video game or an anime. The world is so unique and alien, and this is a series that uses some of my favorite tropes like redemption arcs, underdog and found family tropes, secret societies, badass creeds and training montages, forgotten or fake history, eldritch-like creatures. There's so much that I love about this series. I do want to mention that Rhythm of War was the series that put me into a huge reading slump. As much as I enjoyed it, I did have a few issues with that one. Also, these books are gigantic, and I feel like they could benefit from some more editing and some trimming to help the pacing a bit. Thankfully, the writing style doesn't really bog things down, and for books that are well over 1,000 pages long, they do read quite fast. It's just that 1,200 pages is still a lot to get through. Now, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but this is the series that's really bringing the Cosmere together. And I find that so exciting. If you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, I feel like you're missing out, and you should read them. The Godfather of high fantasy. This is the number 1 on a lot of lists, and some people say that it doesn't hold up in the modern day, that people that put it on the top of their list are just doing so because it's a classic. I hard disagree on this one. I feel like The Lord of the Rings still holds up really well. I think that's probably coming from people who only got halfway through book 1 and gave up. I have never met anyone who's read the entirety of The Lord of the Rings and doesn't have a deep appreciation for it. It was originally published in 1954, and if you put that into consideration, I think it's incredible how well it still holds up. But I will say, I think it is for a certain type of reader. If you got a bit more patience, if you can appreciate a slower pace, then you 100% should read Lord of the Rings. If it has been years since you've read this masterpiece, then I recommend you pick it up and you read it again soon. Every single time I reread these books, I learn to appreciate them even more. If you don't like all the song breaks, you can be forgiven for skipping those. If you don't want to read the 9 stanzas in iambic tetrameter that beautifully tells the tale of Beren and Luthien, then fine, you can miss out on that. It's your loss. So those are my top 10 fantasy books of all time. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, and let me know your top 10 fantasy books in the comments. If you want to help out the channel, make sure to check out my Patreon. Also, alternatively, there is Ko-Fi. Obviously, all of that is just an optional way if you want to support the channel, and I just want you to know that that helps me out so much, and I'm just really happy that I've been able to make videos more often. You guys are amazing. Okay, love you, bye!